So one of the things that we have been noticing, as Albert mentioned, I normally work on trends, demographic trends. But when I joined NAIS, as I said, more than a decade ago, many of the discussions that we used to hear at that point were, competing against each other. Our competition was mainly in our own industry, independent schools. People were complaining also about the poaching of administrators in independent schools. Our industry at that point was strong, and we never talk about, are you checking enrollment numbers? Our story for the press was constantly, yeah, we are very strong, growing and growing, right? Since the recession, after the recession, things seem to have changed. And the reason for that is because there is a combination of factors affecting our industry. There are and this is what I have here in the agenda, There are rapid changes happening in demographics, and this is affecting our student population and also parents, of course. Also, the economy, is affecting mainly millennials, and if you have friends or kids who are millennials, it's very surprising to me to hear from heads of school who said their grandchildren are not attending our schools, and their own kids who are millennials, said, oh, the charter school is good enough, the public school is good enough. Another thing that is happening is also due to technology. The way we are teaching is being questioned by some entrepreneurs, let's say. So we are seeing across the country the emergence of for-profit schools or micro schools, especially in the Northeast and on the West side. But the fact that they emerge in these pockets of the country doesn't mean that the South might be, exempt from this trend to happen. So this is the reason why today more than ever, and it might sound cliche, but we really need to be aware of our specific trends, our specific markets. And just in case, I'm going to share a lot of information, a lot of numbers, but I'm going to send also these slides to SAIS. So if you don't need to start taking notes, you can just refer to them later on. So let's start with the demographics. Essentially what has happened is there has been a recomposition of the student population. In 2010, when the census was last made, it was a tipping point for kids who were 3 years old and younger. It was the first time in the history of our country that population was a majority of color. And that trend had continued over time. So this year, it was also the first time that another tipping point happened. The majority of kids who are 10 years old and younger, they are of color as well. And the other thing that we have also found is that if it wasn't for the increase of the Hispanic kids and the Asian kids, the overall student population in the country would have diminished. So I was running some numbers from the Demographic Center. This is a tool that you can use at NAIS. But what you can see here is, let me move around. I was checking here what has happened since 2010. And the numbers for the South are really good. This is something that we don't see in other areas. And normally when I work with individual schools, we check their specific zip code. So for this session, I just had it very broad, like major metro areas in the South. Atlanta, since 2010, has increased the student population by 9%. In Charlotte, almost 13%. Jacksonville, 11%. These are huge numbers. The only area where we have seen a decrease in student population was in Memphis.
I'm not going to introduce you anymore.
No. And the other thing that we also advise people to do is, okay, this is great, right? But this is looking at the past. So where are we heading? And keep in mind that you can run all of this information based on your zip codes. But looking ahead, again, the numbers are really good in general. There are some for Atlanta, more than 3% increase in the next 5 years. Charlotte, 4%. Miami, 7.5. Nashville, almost 5. And Memphis is sorry, Albert, is expected to continue decreasing. No? This is a fantastic story. Most of the time what I see is everything is in red, and in some areas it's really red. No? So, as I said, the other big trend is this recomposition of the student population. No? And I also ran numbers for SAIS schools. What has happened in the last 10 years? And what you can see here is that from 2009 to 2019, no, in 2009 we have 17% of students of color, and now that number has increased to 24%. No, that is an incredible increase as well. And it was mainly among African American students from 6% to 8%, but also international students, 5%. No, so that can be tricky because many of our schools will consider international students as students of color. But in recent years, we're also tracking what is happening with the international numbers of students coming to our schools. One of the trends that we noticed was that even day schools in elementary schools were bringing international students. But this year, when we checked the numbers for 2017, and this is actually information that comes from Homeland Security. So we have in a database all students who are coming to the country to public or private schools. And when you compare the same number of schools, you see that the international student population has decreased also. So we're keeping an eye on what is happening because some of our schools were attracting international students as a way to meet their enrollment numbers. No, but unfortunately, I mean, there is a lot of anxiety in that market going on. And what is happening also is that markets like Canada and Australia in K-12 education are doing a better job about attracting international students, mainly from China. Now, the other thing that we're also noticing in that market is that China is expanding rapidly. Now, they are creating their own private schools. And actually, I have heard stories of some of our schools who were approached by a Chinese venture capitalist and say, I want to buy your school. No, I want you to open up your same school abroad, no, in China. So that is something else that we're keeping an eye on. Now, what I noticed also is that the number of Hispanic population has not varied that much, but Asian, yes, is up a little bit. No, so why is that important to check? Because if you remember the number, it was 24% in SAIS schools are students of color. But when you compare that to the market, these blue bars, they represent students of color. And you have all the way from 63% of students of color in Memphis, 53% in Atlanta, and the lowest was in Nashville, 31%. So going back to my initial sharing when I said there has been a recomposition of students, one of the things that we also notice is that that increase of the population of students of color is driven by two groups. It's second and third generation Hispanics. So this is not immigration anymore. And in the case of Asian students is immigration. It's Asian people coming, and since 2009, the number of Asian people coming to the country has surpassed the number of people coming from Latin America in general. So this is again great news. I also check out the projections by different ethnic groups. Normally in other areas of the country, what we see is mainly multiracial students. But in the South, you see all different colors. But essentially is the orange represents the multiracial. These are the very high bars. Then we have other race, sometimes that is mixed with Hispanic. Yellow is Hispanic. It's also up. The white non-Hispanic population is decreasing a little bit, but not to the extent that we have seen again in other areas of the country. This is a dull color. Only in Memphis, and that might be the reason why the overall student population is decreasing in that area. It's because of there are not enough maybe yet students of color that can counterbalance the decreasing numbers of white population in Memphis. when we talk about the economy, I think that the best way to see how the changes in the economy are impacting our families is just to look at what is happening to millennial parents. One of the things that we notice is, by far now they are the parents in our industry, but also this is the generation that for the first time is having higher levels of student debt, higher levels of unemployment, lower levels of wealth, and lower levels of income when compared to Gen Xers and the baby boomers, the two previous generations. So no wonder why they are delaying having children, and you probably are noticing that already in your schools. In the school of my children, it was interesting to hear the admission person saying that, yeah, this year we have 40% of our families have only one child. And the area where I live, if you look around all the houses, they were built for 4 children. Now, this is sorry, by the way, I live in the Bay Area in California. The other big change is delaying buying houses. So I would argue that now our tuitions are competing with the option of putting a down payment for a house. And also the other big change that we're noticing is in terms of savings. This number over here says 48% of millennials plan to pay a college cost for their children, in comparison to 16% of Gen Xers when they were also the same age group. So what we're hearing also from millennial parents is that they don't want their children to have the same concerns and anxieties that they had to live when going through all these, amassing these amounts of debt. So delaying children, maybe discussing buying a new house, or paying for private education of my children, saving for college, or paying right now for K-12 education. Another area that I'm constantly checking is housing. That's the reason why I'm checking housing, because of the impact that it might have on millennial parents. In our area, again, as you can imagine, living in areas like New York or the Bay Area, housing is extremely expensive. And when I say expensive, I think it was last week, working with a board in New York. And when they gave me the list of their zip codes, it was insane. Some of the average homes were around 2 million, 3 million, So in our areas, what we're hearing is we actually are losing families to the south, because they said, oh, this is insane. For the same amount of money, I can buy a beautiful house in the south. But still, when you look at the numbers, and all of this is already adjusted for inflation, the price of housing in Atlanta has increased by 60% since 2010. In Memphis, 37%. In Miami, 92%. Nashville, 60%. I was, I think, last month in Nashville, and it was incredible to see the amount of, flipping that is happening there. And my Uber driver was telling me, yeah, we are concerned. I don't know if we can afford any longer living here, because the prices are going up and up. So that's the reason why normally we check what is happening to the housing market. The other reason is because before the birth of the housing market, we saw a positive correlation between housing values and also the applications for independent schools. Housing is the most valuable asset that people might have, so you feel like, yeah, I can afford to pay for private education. And I wanted also to share with you why I think in some areas of the country and in some of our schools in the South too, we're having this challenge in attracting enough parents. I think that our pie has diminished, and in terms of affordability, that's what I mean. But this green line represents the income. This is the pace of increase for the income in the top 20 percentile of families in the country. This red one represents the pace of increase for the top 5% of income earners in the country. This purplish one is the average income. So you can see how the gap is forming there. This is the cost of living inflation, CPI. and this yellow is our tuition. So, in this period, until 1984, no, what is important to keep in mind is not what is the tuition, no, but in comparison to how much, if tuition is increasing at the same pace as income, there is no problem, right? You still see it's affordable. But what happened is, until 1994, tuition in independent schools was growing at the same pace as all these different groups. No? So that's the reason why we could have also different professions represented in our schools. Then after the mid-80s, tuition started to increase at the same pace as the income for the top income earners in the country. And that has happened until 2001, 2002. So after that year is when our tuitions are increasing faster than the income for the top 5% of income earners in the country. So no wonder why when I'm visiting some of our schools, and I don't know what is happening in your schools, but I hear stories from the West Coast or the East Coast where they say, we don't have any longer nurses. We don't have doctors, lawyers. They are not coming. And at least in these two big areas, what we're seeing is venture capitalists or people working in banking. They are the only ones who can afford now our schools. And that's what I mean by our pie might be shrinking, because we are leaving behind some of these people. And to be honest with you, my husband is also a product of independent schools in California. And we are not sending our kids to our schools. We cannot afford it. That's what we normally say. And when we were in Washington, D.C., we were paying at that time, our kid, my oldest was still in kindergarten, and we were paying, I think it was $24,000 a year for daycare. So I was like, well, that is kind of like the same level of tuition for independent school. So I decided to look at our schools in the area. And then he told me, yeah, but you're forgetting that we have another one. What are we going to do? We cannot send two. So we settle now for, well, good enough. Another is a parochial school. It's good enough for us. So I also ran some reports in comparing the tuitions. Oh, I'm sorry, this was not safe. But all of this is actually tuitions for the big areas in the South. Atlanta is the first one, and I'm comparing what is the percentage of tuition versus the income level in the area. And it's median income level. Unfortunately, I could not find the 20 percentile or 5th percentile for income levels in the South. But you have in 2010, for instance, in Atlanta, it represented 26% of income, and now it's at 32%. In Charlotte, it's actually the opposite. It used to be 32% of the income, the median income, and now it's 29%. Memphis, also going down. In Miami, it has increased a lot, from 25% to now 45%. Nashville also is more expensive, now. And to give you also a benchmark of comparison, the typical American family spends around 26% of his total income on housing. Granted, the vast majority of Americans send their children to public schools. But if you keep that in mind, normally the number that they assign to education, and that includes college, is around 3% of their income. So for the typical family, the most important expense normally is housing. And you can see that in some of our metro areas in the South, we are, again, that's the reason why I said, I think we're competing with housing, especially for the millennial parents. So what have we done as an industry? After the recession in particular, what we saw was also, most of our schools, almost every single one, revamp financial aid. And what has happened with financial aid is also a shift. In the past, most of people applying for financial aid were in the low income level, and now most of them are in the upper level bracket. Families earning $150K and more a year. And you can see also how the number of students on financial aid has increased in each of these areas. Now, for all SAIS schools, it used to be, in 2010, it was 19% of our students. Now it's at 24%. And when we were talking to heads of school at the beginning, they were puzzled by the fact that this used to be a full-pay family. And now we're having these very transactional conversations where some of these families are like, okay, if you want me to re-enroll, how much is on the table for financial aid? No? So it's because of what I was mentioning before, that how expensive we are becoming. And you can see it's, when we look at the overall numbers, the fastest growth in terms of financial aid is going towards those people who are in the upper income level. And it's not because they want to game the system, it's because they also need the assistance. So essentially, when you look at the way you're using financial aid, we are seeing schools struggling because in the past, it used to be more to be more inclusive and to provide financial aid to those families in need. And now, for many of our schools, it has become a way to meet your enrollment numbers. So for the competition, as I mentioned earlier, when I joined NAIS, we were always talking about this independent school versus this other independent school. But over the years, especially in the last couple of years, there has been an emergence of so many different alternatives. Today, more than ever, parents have so many options. We have charter schools, homeschooling, and yesterday I shared this with a group of board trustees and heads. I think in 2014, it was a tipping point for homeschooling in North Carolina. It was the first year where the majority of all homeschoolers in that state were larger than all students enrolling in private education. Yes, and we have a conversation about it, because the notion normally is that, oh yeah, that happens with people who have some religious belief, Well, I also checked the numbers from the Department of Education. Unfortunately, this is a very difficult industry to track, but the latest numbers from the Department of Education indicated that I think it was 46% of those parents have bachelor's degrees, and the main three reasons why they were, opting for homeschooling were, things like, I don't like the program in the public school. So the third reason in the line was religion. And also the definition of what is homeschooling have changed. Technology, again, has made it very easy for us to explore alternatives. And even there is a new group of parents that we're calling it do-it-yourself, because they think that schools, and by the way, I talked to two of these do-it-yourself, were former parents of independent schools. They were main speakers in one of our conferences on innovation. And when I was talking with them, they say, yeah, it's so inefficient. So one of them is a professor in design and innovation in one of the universities in Seattle. And they were explaining that now you can have like a co-op, and free time for kids and also monies. So they have enough time now to split the way they are teaching their kids. They use a lot of technology, of course. That's what they like. But they feel like that is they are immersing the kids again in the real world. So we are seeing a lot of these type of approaches to education. Also, the other big change is venture capitalists who used to donate money directly to make changes in public education, like the Bill Gates, Zuckerbergs, right? And now what is happening is like, no, it takes forever. So some of these people are opting for creating their own schools, And if you have heard, for instance, one of the stories that I remember is from Old School, which is per se a different type of school, But Max Ventanilla, the founder of Old Schools, he is a product of independent education. He attended Buckley School in New York. And when his daughter was 4 years old, he was touring all the different Bay Area schools. And his comment was, I cannot believe this. They look exactly the same that when I was in school. Why is that? So that is something else that we're seeing, and that's the reason why some entrepreneurs are deciding, well, maybe I can do my own school. No? So I just wanted to show you some numbers about charter schools. And the reason for that is because charter schools, when we started to see what is happening with charter schools, at NAIS, the impression, and for many of our members, it was like, they are serving a different niche of the market. But in hindsight, what happened is this is a typical disruptive innovation. We thought, oh, the charter schools, they are just serving city kids, no, or kids who were African Americans, Latino. No, and what has happened is over time, they continue iterating, improving their product, no, their schools, and now many of our schools are competing directly with charter schools. And this is just, there's a lot of information here, but I wanted also to show you some of the differences with many of the newcomers to the market. These are, some of them are for profit, some of them are non-profit. But essentially, because technology has ended the monopoly we used to have on knowledge, now, a lot of people are saying that, well, you know, what we need to do is a new approach to education. So we have some students, student-led learning, like in Wildflower schools, non-traditional teachers, meaning that many of these schools are saying that the teachers need to entice students to have questions, have a conversation, more like a Socratic approach to education as opposed to be lecturing, kids what to do. They use, like many of our schools, a lot of project-based learning. Sometimes there is no traditional grading because the purpose is that the students have to demonstrate the mastery of what they are learning. And in some of these places, it might be all the way from, you choose how you're going to demonstrate that you learn something. You can create a video, you can create a story, you talk to the, there is a school in particular where they invite community members, parents, and students present in whatever format that they want what they are learning. And some of the advantages that these schools have is the business model. They tend to charge lower tuition because there is less physical plan in some cases. In others, it's because they work in networks, so they can centralize the HR office, the finance office, etc. One of the things that I noticed also is that they normally say, they advertise this, there is no fundraising. So the price you see is all what we're charging. There are no hidden costs. But this is another group of schools that we're keeping an eye on, because as I said, we have been, some of these schools in particular have been expanding really rapidly. And if some of you are in Texas, you might have heard about Acton Academy in Austin. But Acton Academy is a very clever model. What they do is franchise. So if one of our schools is interested in becoming an Acton Academy, there is some conversation that happens. There has to be some matching of the program, but essentially that's the way they are growing.